as time has gone on, wargaming has gotten more and more creative, if you will, with newer premiums that have been released into the game. I'd say they've been very creative in the past couple of years, not only with premium ships, but newer tech line ships as well. They're introducing ships that have, weird gun setups. Maybe they have higher tier guns or lower tier guns at their tier. Maybe their armor's weird. They have this oddball consumable, or something about them is just weird and off. And when we saw these guys get announced in their dev blogs, or however they were announced, we took several double takes at that dev blog. For quite a few of these, I had to read through the dev blog 2 or 3 times to make sure I read the ship's stats right. So these are my top 5 WTF ships, those ships that make you take double takes at their existence and questioning where in the world did Wargaming find these designs. Now, some of these designs are actually historical, and speaking of history, if you're a fan or a history buff, if you will, you should definitely check out Sunday's video. We finally released our cinematic recreation of the Battle of Jutland. I think it got overshadowed by certain political events of that day, with the news cycle kind of kicking into high gear, so it kind of got buried. But again, if you're a fan of the cinematic videos that we do, if you're just a history buff, or if you just like seeing ships sail around in formation and such, you should definitely check out Sunday's video. We put a lot of hard work into it. It took over a month for us to put it all together. It was myself and 20 other fellows. We took time out of our day to get this together, so I'd really appreciate it if you check it out. You can also get 2 free Battle of Jutland containers. Wargaming did provide a code for that video, so you can get free stuff by just watching the video and getting the code in the video. So your link to that will be somewhere here and in the description down below. I'll probably pin it in the comment as well. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get on into it. Coming in at number 5, we have the Tier 10 Special Resource Reward Ship, whatever you want to call it, British battle cruiser, the Incomparable. This is one of the few British ships that actually live up to its name. There's truly nothing in this game that you can compare the Incomparable to, because it's just an absolutely just lunacy, all the things this ship has going for it. So first off, it's a battle cruiser, so it's fast. It's have thinner armor because of that, and a lower HP pool, but that's pretty vanilla by today's standards, right? But then you get to its weapons. She has 6 20-inch guns on this battle cruiser hull. Massive guns, even by today's standards. On top of those 20-inch guns, she also has torpedoes. 11-kilometer torpedoes that she can single drop because British. She gets a speed boost as well, because naturally this battle cruiser that's already incredibly fast needs to go faster, and hydroacoustic surge for good, whatever. They just felt like giving it to her for some reason. So it's a 3-kilometer hydro as well, so it's not overtly useful. I mean, it gives you enough time to probably not eat an entire wall of torpedoes. The ship is incredibly long, so it takes quite some time for it to actually turn because of its turning circle radius, but it's better than no warning at all. Now, all in all, just that right there, that set of skills and consumables is a pretty solid matchup. But then you get to one of the most ludicrous things about the ship, and that's its concealment. This is a Tier 10 battle cruiser that's quite long. It's I think one of the longest ships in the game, yet it has a 10-kilometer concealment. That's right, this thing with 20-inch guns can stealth torp. And believe it or not, it actually works out a lot. It's got I think a kilometer and a half, or a little under a kilometer and a half of range where it can stealth torp, but it can stealth torp. But besides just the fact that this thing can stealth torp, you have a 20-inch gun battle cruiser that can go very fast with its speed boost, like well in advance of 35 knots, with a 10-kilometer concealment, which means you can be within 10 kilometers of you can be 10.7 kilometers away from another battleship, and they will have no clue that you're there with your 6 20-inch guns. Now, you might be thinking, well, it's a battle cruiser, so it's got thin armor, so it doesn't really, it can't really do that. It doesn't have the capability to do that. Well, that's where you're wrong, too, because they gave it an improved heal. Now, it's not quite the Conqueror's super heal, but you can regenerate a good chunk of your HP pool with this heal. So you can play it a little bit more aggressive if you wish to do so. But it does still have thin armor. You still can get easily clapped because of your low HP pool and your extremely thin armor by Tier 10 standards. But this thing is just ridiculous, fellas. If the gun configuration was a little bit odder, it probably would be one of the weirdest ships in game. but it's just so dumb, and I love this thing so much because of that. She is a still ship, so you do have to put quite a bit of time in the game to acquire her, but she has to be one of the dumbest, funnest WTF ships in the game for sure. So just a ludicrous ship, a fun ship. You ever have the resources to pick her up, I would definitely recommend it. Maybe not the first still ship you should pick up, but one I would definitely pick up before your time here with World Warships comes to an end. And that brings us on down now to our number 4 slot, which is the Tier 8 Premium Soviet battleship, the Borodino. Now, the Borodino is quite the combination of Soviet ships. If you look at the Borodino, you might recognize the hull. That's because it is essentially, well, not essentially, I believe it is, a Stalingrad hull. So, you have Stalingrad at Tier 8, with the hull at least. And you get some of Stalingrad's goodies, like the radar. You do have the Soviet radar. It's one of the a few battleships in game that does have a radar. So, that's pretty good in and of itself, but you might also be taking a look at the ship right now and thinking, those are some mighty small rear guns. That's because those are secondary guns. Which means that, yes, all the guns are in front of the superstructure. But she does have 16-inch main battery guns, which are quite good at Tier 8, especially since they are the Soviet 16-inch guns. Which means, at Tier 8, 16-inch, you can't outright overmatch a lot of battleships at Tier 8 that aren't battle cruisers. But when you do get top tier and you can see, Tier 7 and Tier 6 ships, then yes, you can absolutely just go straight through those guys' armor with the Soviet shells and the Soviet shell ballistics and such. Now, the Borodino, for as weird of a ship as it is, it's actually pretty good when RNG does work with you. The dispersion I found is very, very inconsistent. It's not quite as bad as something like the German battleships and such, but when it works, and it does absolutely slap at times. And you tend to, of course, play her like, a Stalingrad or any Soviet large ship. That is what's good about playing the Soviet large ships, like the heavy cruisers and the battleships and stuff. They all play fairly similarly, right? You do get bound to the target, you stay angled, and, use your good armor and your usually sizable HP pool to tank a lot of damage. You can certainly do that here in the Borodino, but of course you do only have 25mm bound stern plating, so you do of course have to play it more like Stalingrad and stay angled rather than just straight up bow tank enemy shells coming in at you. But the ship is just such a weird combination of Soviet characteristics and ships. They kind of just Legoed Soviet battleship together with the Borodino. I do believe she is still available, but you really don't see her at all. She would have been a really good candidate for last week's video. For probably a variety of reasons, again, with the way this ship is usually played. When you're running to submarines, which, Tier 8, you can see Tier 8 subs and Tier 6 subs, so there's usually a pretty either healthy or unhealthy amount of submarines in Tier 8 matchmaking, depending upon how, of course, you do submarines. And, submarines love it when you park up next to an island and you stay incredibly still. So that, along with, again, the 25mm bow and stern, probably why she's not played too much anymore, but she's a pretty solid ship if you do ever get around to picking one up. But yeah, definitely just a weird combination of hull and gun here with the Borodino. Alright, and that takes us down now to number 3, which is the Tier 10 British large cruiser, the Defence. I forgot what video last week we were talking about the large cruisers. And I said, yeah, all these other nations have gotten their Tier 10 large cruisers except for Germany and the British. But then I completely forgot that the British got Defence in the Kitakami event with last Christmas. And the Defence, it's just like, man, this is Son of Nelson right here. It's literally Nelson's child that hasn't matured yet. He hasn't hit puberty yet, so he hasn't gotten his third barrel in his turrets, and his turrets are still growing. They're only 14-inch guns, right? So it's a youth Nelson, a young Nelson, right? But it is a very weird cruiser. So you get King George V guns, you get literally the top turrets from the King George V, the twin 14-inch gun turrets with incredible accuracy. If you look at some of the shots in the background, the shells go essentially where you point, which is very good if you can aim. And you get, British BBHE on a cruiser slot, basically, along with the AP. The AP is actually, man, the defense is one of those ships where it's like, okay, I'm going to use the AP. But, you have 14-inch guns, which on a cruiser is pretty darn good, right? But when you're looking at it from like a battleship perspective, it's like, there's not really a whole lot you can overmatch at tier 10 with these 14-inch guns. Like, even when you're talking about cruisers, of course, like light cruisers, and some of the lesser armored heavy cruisers. So you find yourself swinging back and forth between the AP and HE a lot. So I'll be like, I see this guy's turning, I'll get AP in the twos, but then by the time the AP's loaded, the guy's already turned out. So this is a ship you definitely want to get expert loader on. This isn't a dedicated defense captain. I have one in the background, which is why I keep swapping back and forth between HE so much. Because I had one, I don't know where I put him, that did have expert loader on it. So yeah, definitely want to take that skill. But yeah, you get the 14-inch guns with the high accuracy. So when stuff is broadside to you, you can absolutely slap the living crap out of it. When I was playing the defense for the review video, I deleted so many broadside cruisers playing this ship because of that. It's really nice having 14-inch guns that are this accurate. So on top of the 14-inch guns, you also get the short burst smoke generator, which is an interesting thing to give this ship. It's great for breaking line of sight and having to run away when you need to do that, because like many a British cruiser, the armor of the defense is not well present at all. It feels like a lot of times, especially again, it is a tier 10 ship with the thin armor and such, and being in tier 10 and super ship games, you do find yourself on the lower end of your HP pool quite a lot, but it does get a heal. Unfortunately, not the good old British super heal that the other high tier British cruisers do get. So you got to be very careful with what you're doing in the defense. But when you can get to those side shots and get the sides of the cruisers, even battleships, of course, too, 6 14-inch shells all going where you aim, that's going to hurt you. I don't care what ship you're in. Yes, they're small guns by tier 10 battleship standards, but they still pack one hell of a punch. But yeah, a ship that is just such a weird setup for a cruiser, but I do like it. It can be quite fun. She does have torpedoes as well. So if you can get in close, you have those torpedoes in your hull that you can toss at the enemy ships, and then you can hit them with the 14-inch guns. The torpedoes didn't finish them off. But with that British BBHE, you can kind of sit back and farm if you need to, be cautious, and then you can move in with the AP later with the 14-inch guns and do some real damage with the AP and the torpedoes. So another weird ship, probably one of the weirdest cruisers we've had in this game so far, although the upcoming German hybrid cruiser is probably going to find itself on a future version of this list. But yes, definitely for sure one of the weirdest cruisers in game at the moment. All right, that takes us on down now to number 2, which is the tier 10 German sub, the U4501. This one's pretty self-explanatory, fellas. It's a sub that goes 40 knots. That's just what? What's really funny is that you got to remember, this is the nerfed version of the 4501. The original version went like 45 knots underwater, which is just so dumb. And I'm so glad they at least nerfed it to where I think it tops out at just under 40 knots at the moment, at the time of recording. They may buff it, they may nerf it a little bit more, but that is still so fast for a submarine to go, because most submarines, at least at higher tier, 20-ish knots. There's one or two that can go over 20 knots at tier 10, but most of them peter out around 20 knots at tier 10, which, gives you a chance to run them down, especially if there's a destroyer nearby, and with how they nerf the torpedoes to where within 3 kilometers, they're like basically, squeaky toys. Submarines can still run you, I'm sorry, not submarines, destroyers can still run you down, drive over you, drop their depth charges, or it's a lot easier for the other surface ships to hit you with their plane drop depth charges, because again, you're only going besides the 4501, 20-ish knots at tier 10. But with the 4501, the best thing you can do is just dive and keep your foot down. Because if you get spotted at the surface level or at periscope depth, you're only going 20 knots. So you drop down to 30 meters, and now you're greatly quickly accelerating to almost 40 knots in just a few seconds, which really throws off a lot of players aiming. Of course, if you know this, you know that the 4501 is probably beelining to get away from you. You can adjust for that, because when you do touch A or D with the U4501, you do instantly just drop back down to 19 kilometers. It's got to be one of the quickest deceleration times in the game, which probably ironically also makes it difficult to shoot, because if you turn and suddenly you go from 39 knots to 19 knots, that's also one of the best breaks in the game to throw off the ASW charges coming from the surface ship. So yeah, that's just dumb. This ship was announced like years ago, and for a long time, I thought they just shelved the thing because they were going through all these balancing changes with submarines. But then we got a dev blog out of the blue that they had adjusted the 4501's speed, and then they gave her some other things. Like they did give her a heel. This is, I think, one of one submarines in the game right now that have a heel. The Soviet submarines that were announced years ago, they had heels, but they haven't shown up in the game yet. So here's hoping it takes quite some time for them to finally show up. Then now we have our last fella, our number one slot, the Tier 9 American battleship, the Kearsarge. I genuinely did not believe this was a real ship when I first saw it. And I was streaming when this ship was announced, and some of y'all were in chat saying, "Hey, Sheila, did you see the new American battleship? It's a Montana with a flight deck." I said, "No way. No way." Well, I think the first thing I got told was that it was an Iowa with a flight deck. It had 9 16-inch guns. And I was like, "Oh no, that's kind of crazy." And then the next chat in the chat box was, actually it has 12 16-inch guns. Which is an absolutely ridiculous amount of firepower to have at Tier 9. Like, if you give a Tier 9 battleship 12 16-inch guns, that alone is some of the best firepower by Tier 9 BB standards. But then you go and you throw a flight deck in the middle with mid-range rockets. Yeah, that's a bit much. And boy, the Kearsarge is truly something. Now, it does have a 36-second reload time because of that. The planes don't have any type of consumables, and they are quite frail. So that kind of helps keep the Kearsarge in check. But this is just such a ridiculous ship. And it was a real design. Some American engineers designed it for I think the Russian Navy sent some officers over to the U.S. and asked some American engineers to draw up a design for the ultimate battleship. So, yeah, it was designed, but I don't think it went much further than like the initial concept drawings of the ship, thank God. But yeah, I mean, just on the guns alone, you have great firepower by Tier 9 standards. Another thing, too, is that it avoids a lot of the downsides of other hybrid ships, in that it's from the ground up designed as a hybrid ship, so she's quick, maneuverable. She has actually pretty decent armor everywhere except for the hangar deck, right? Because, that's all superstructure, and that can all be easily pinned. It's all, I think, 19 millimeters thick, if that even. So that hangar is just a giant tumor that can be farmed down quite easily. But, I mean, if you know how to play American battleships, you can make the Kearsarge work. She's actually really, really good at mid-range, and what really helps her not only just be a good ship, but also a really good premium, is that you can do a lot with those planes. You can spot, you can scout caps, you can get a good consistent damage in, because how many times does this happen where you spawn on a flank, you and your teammate just roll over the enemy team, and now you gotta go run to the other side of the map to try and get in range against some more damage before the round ends. Well, with the Kearsarge planes, you can do that without having to get in range, because the planes have unlimited range, right? So you can fly your planes around, get good consistent damage with those HE rockets, set a couple of fires, have some nice fire damage coming in, and the planes are unlimited. They're not like CV planes where you have a certain amount of reserve, and you regenerate one plane at a time. The entire flight's back when the cooldown time, or the reloading time, I'm sorry, because it's a armament, it's not a consumable, which I still think is pretty odd. But anyway, yeah, once the reload time's done, you have a full flight back, and off you go again. So yeah, she's actually a really good premium ship. It does kind of hurt to say that a hybrid ship is one of the best premium ships in game, but I'd be lying to you otherwise. But yes, she is definitely my number one WTF ship because, again, I did not actually believe she was a thing when she was announced. So guys, those are my top 5 WTF ships. Let me know in the comments down below, what are your top 5 WTF ships? What ships did you not believe were real or were just too ludicrous to be a viable thing in this game? Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday and wonderful rest of your week, and I hope to catch you guys in the next one.